We're going to get started and dive in. So I will be asking each of our panelists to state their name, the school that they teach at, and identify a teacher that has impacted their teaching, someone that has made them think about the way they're teaching and the way they reach out to students. Who would like to start us off tonight?
I'll start. Hi, I'm Maureen Lamb. I teach at Kingswood Oxford School in West Hartford, Connecticut. And I think the teacher who probably had the most impact on me was my AP European history teacher, Mr. Kirkaldy. He was wonderful. He used storytelling as a way to really bring history to life. And he used pieces of artwork. And when we were having a bad day, he'd do silly, fun things with us. He really met us where we were, but he pushed us to do our best work. And so I remember those lessons so fondly, even today. And so he's retired this year after 40 years of teaching. So well deserved, but he was awesome.
I'll go. So I'm Rachel Ash. I teach at Parkview High School in Georgia. And Mr. Dugan was one of my favorite teachers in high school. We bonded over a mutual love of Indiana Jones. And he was my world history teacher. That may be a theme, who knows? And we loved ancient cultures, both of us. And so he would loan me books. And when we had like things in common, he would share them. And he was also interested in lots of different aspects of cultures. He loaned me a book on Buddhism, etc. So it was just, about sort of exploring different ideas from different cultures. And I really appreciated that about him.
I'll go. Hi, everyone. I'm Benjamin Jaffe, and I teach Latin at the Hewitt School in New York City. The teacher that I think of when you pose the question is actually someone who wasn't a teacher at our school, though he was very much and still is very much a teacher. His name is Yehuda Rothner, and he happened to live next door to my grandparents. Just someone who I knew in the neighborhood. And he's someone who, because I chatted with him whenever I visited my grandparents, he was someone who had encouraged me because he would chat about what am I learning in school. Went to a Jewish day school growing up. And of course, and Bible was something that we studied. But what was sort of fascinating to me about studying with Yehuda, because he had encouraged me, because he heard about what I was learning, but said, oh, if you ever want to go through X, Y, and Z, just Saturday afternoon or whatever it was, we did. And what he taught me to do was something I later got in trouble for at Jewish day school, which was not what I thought was the point, probably not his point, taught me to question the text. Up until that point, really my learning in Bible class was, what does the text say? How do you translate it? Next sentence. And of course, there's something to the narrative, but I remember that after a few weeks of studying with him, I would come into class, dutiful student that I was, but I would start asking questions that were really, I was causing disruption. I didn't realize I was in the 5th grade, but teaching me to, I haven't stopped questioning the text since then. He was later camp counselor, director of a camp, and he does all sorts of experiential learning stuff, even still to this day. Just really big impact for me.
Thanks, Ben. Who's next?
So I can go.
Great.
So I'm John Bracey. I teach Latin at Belmont High School in Belmont, Massachusetts. And I'd have to say the teacher that probably just pops in my mind the most is my guy Marios Philippides. He was a professor at UMass Amherst, and he was just like we were just kindred spirits, because his whole job, like the way that he viewed everything, was to look at whatever messed up stuff is not what you normally talk about, and he always would go straight there, and we'd always hang out there, and that's where I live. And so he really has inspired me to be that kind of teacher. And yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thanks, John.
I'm Jen Jarnigan. I teach at the Episcopal School of Dallas in Dallas, Texas. My favorite teacher when I was young and someone who really had a profound impact on me is actually my first grade teacher, Mrs. Ardwan, because I was not particularly interested in school. I wanted to learn how to read so that I could be independent, and I wanted to draw, and that was really it. If we were doing something that wasn't those two things, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be over here doing my thing. I don't want anything to do with what is happening right now. Which, perhaps sounds like some kids in your class. And I feel really lucky to have had her when I was so young, because she had a way of saying, oh, those are the things you love. Well, let's see how you can use those things to show me that you understand the math. Like, draw a visual for me that shows that you understand this concept of addition or whatever we were doing, and she just made everyone feel really seen, and she would meet you where you were, and she knew how to leverage what you were interested in and value it, which was not something you saw a lot of in like rural Southwest Louisiana first grades. So that was a huge one. And the other is the late Jean D'Amato Thomas, my undergraduate, Louisiana Scholars College, who was just such a fierce advocate for her students and for her program. And she was not afraid to speak truth to power all day, every day. And if she thought something was right, she was going to stand up for it. And so I feel like those are sort of the shoulders the giants whose shoulders I'm standing on in my work as a teacher.
Great. Well, I think we'll start out with Maureen, if you want to come off mute. One of the participants this week posed the questions. They'd actually like to know if you have any advice for teachers beginning out, starting in their career, who find it overwhelming to write so much authentic or original material. The second part of that question is, what might be some ways to include student choice with a manageable workload?
Those are great questions. I have to say that as teachers and being part of a teaching community, especially in Latin, I feel like everyone is really awesome about sharing materials. So if someone writes a cool story about it, they'll put it on Latin Teacher Idea Exchange or something like that. And people are usually quite generous about sharing. And so really, if you're looking for something, ask questions. People will help you. I think we have a good connection. We have a good community of teachers who will help. And I think that's been really helpful to me. I'm on textbook for Latin 3, AP Latin, Greek, and mythology. So I write a lot of my own materials because there's not a ton of stuff out there for ancient Greek. But if you need stuff, let me know. I have fun stories about Io and Midas, and I'm writing one on Atalanta. So, but there's a lot of stuff out there. Mille Noctes is out there too, which is a lot of different Latin stories, and you can take those and adapt them, attribute it to the author, but then adapt it the way you need it for your classes. There are also a lot of novellas out there. I use a lot of novellas in my classes. One of my favorites is Cloelia by Ellie Arnold, which is actually available as a free PDF as well as a hard copy, those have been lifesavers, the ones that are available as PDFs right now because of the COVID and everything. But I'd say look for things other people have used too. You don't always have to be a hero and make all of your own things, but if you're passionate about something, write about it. And do your best. If you want feedback, ask people for feedback. People are wonderful about kind of giving feedback on each other's work too. If you're writing a new story, people are always willing to kind of read and edit and give you some feedback on it. So that can be really helpful. It can be daunting, but it's something that you can absolutely do, especially if it's something your students are interested in. If it's driven by student interest and they want to learn about something, they're going to engage with it. And so that makes it fun to write it for them. I know Rachel does a lot with this too. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that part?
Yeah, well, definitely your idea about just something you're passionate about, because if you're passionate about it, you can definitely get the kids interested in it. That's just one of those things. As when you were talking about the student choice part too, there's small shortcuts that you can do with that. Like pick 2 things that you know a lot about and then let them choose between those 2 things. Don't be like, what would you like to learn about? And leave it wide open, narrow it. big shortcuts to student choice is keeping the choices within things that you know you can do, so that it won't be overwhelming for you, or between things like you were talking about that are already made, but you have easy access to. Here's these two PDF resources that are already out there. Which of these two topics would you like to have access to? And then within that, you can even give choice, okay, we have these texts, pick which way you would like to show me that you understand it. Would you like to, if you're the type of student that likes to make movies, you can make a movie. If you're the type of student that would like to, there's students who really just want to do a translation. And if that's what they want to do, let them do that, because sometimes that's what those kids want to do. Just, I've been showing them how easy it is to tell if they've done Google Translate. But aside from that, just, give them options even within the things that they're going to do to show you that they're understanding. Small options makes them really feel like they have a lot of power. Even when it's just like 2 options or 3 options within an assignment. But yeah, I think you're right on the money with, like, there are people out here that, when I first started teaching 18 years ago, which is a long time now, especially in terms of the internet, there weren't that many things online for Latin teachers. And since then, we've just sort of created as a community a lot of cool resources and just come together as a community to offer things for everybody. So ask, somebody may have already made it. Why reinvent the wheel? But if you want to invent a wheel, then do it, because somebody else will probably want it. We are all so excited to have these things. The coolest thing that has happened is in the last, I don't know what, 5 years, 1 million novellas have come out. So but yeah, like you said you've done what, a textbook Latin 3 and AP and Greek. So the other thing I say is, don't do everything at once. Like, baby steps.
I definitely did it one at a time.
Yeah.
One at a time. It just did it that way.
Because I've seen people do that where they try to do everything at once, and that is death. Just honestly, because it's so much work. Just a little bit at a time, one level, and then another level, or even like part of a level, and then go back to stuff. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be everything. And this year especially, like, do what you can, and then move. Survive. So.
Yeah.
Oh, those are such helpful tips. Sorry, Maureen, Rachel. Yeah, you both awesome tips. And I'm excited because I see a question has come in on our Q&A. So we're going to jump over to that question if you all are ready. And it's exciting because I have a homework myth book that's waiting to go out to a wonderful teacher. And it's sitting on my desk. So I'm interested to hear what everyone thinks about this question. What advice do you give a teacher in a district where there is a focus on a lot of homework and grading with the bell curve result? If some of you want to tackle this, anyone else, feel free to type in your answer as well here in the panel. But yes, I'd love to have someone take this on.
For homework, I would say give homework choice board. I have templates if you don't want to reinvent the wheel. I do presentational tasks, interpersonal tasks, interpretive tasks, investigative tasks. I have students choose what they want to do, and they can do the homework on their own pace. I give them, 2 or 3 weeks to complete the choice board, and they get to do what they want. And I've done some funky ones too, like bingo and the floor is lava, where they get different pieces of furniture just to make it interesting for them. But giving homework choice where they have to have homework every night can be a very valuable thing. Grading with a bell curve is hard. I don't know if I'm the best one to take that question, because I'm looking toward more skill and proficiency-based grading personally. Does anyone want to tackle that one?
My first thought with it is, because I try to do more of a standards-based grading approach. I'm wondering where rubrics fit in on this bell curve situation, and if you can't be very creative with your use of rubrics. And how points have to be distributed versus, you know, can you make, if I'm assuming in a bell curve, you're going to want most kids to meet expectations, right? Presumably. And if you can just set the points on that rubric to where what meets expectations gets you most of the points, and then you're kind of looking at the difference between maybe, as opposed to the middle of the curve being a C, the middle of the curve being an 85. If you can shift that over, and if all they want is that distribution, you'll still get a bell, but you're not, the bottom of the bell is still passing as opposed to being like out of luck and the drowning in the 50s and below kind of area. So that's my first thought, is perhaps you can get a little creative there. And just to piggyback off Maureen, when I've been in situations where I've had to give homework, I love that choice board idea. I saw it and I was like, ooh, I'm taking this. Thank you, thank you. But even if you really need something even simpler, what I used to tell them was study X and prove it. So vocabulary we know works really well. So do something that where you've reviewed your vocab and prove it to me. That can be a screenshot of, you did a Quizlet set and you took a little Quizlet quiz and you take your little screenshot of your result. It can be, nowadays, there's so much more tech you can use. Make a Flipgrid where you summarize the story or so whatever, you know, teach your parents some words and video them saying it, whatever it could, you know, just little things like that. They could make note cards and show them to me. They could play a Gimket and show it to me. So there's a, you know, anytime, just exact same idea, giving them choice. But if you don't have time to curate choices, you can really put it on the kids and just have them, you know, have them understand what proving it to you looks like and empower them to make that decision. And it saves everyone a lot of time. And that way homework can still be useful as opposed to just busy work.
Thanks, Jen.
All right, can I throw in real quick? I have some really quick advice on that one.
Definitely.
Oh, sorry, Rachel. I'll just go really fast. So, so number one, so okay, so this is what advice I would give really quickly. So, okay, number one, find out exactly who wants you to give homework specifically. Find out exactly who that person or persons are. Find out exactly what it is that they want to see from you and who wants to see that and all that other stuff. Find out in detail exactly what the person wants to see. Because once you find that out, then there's a million ways to not give homework. So I have spent the last several years finding very creative ways to not give homework. Fortunately, in my current situation, they're like, hey, yeah, do what you do. But before that, I was, you know, nearly tarred and feathered, and I'm shocked I'm still alive. But yeah, so I still didn't give it. So I'd pretend to give it. I'd write fake homework on the board. I'd say I'd sign stuff, never check it. So I'd find out very specifically what they want when they say homework. And if you have to grade it, like find out all the details and game it. And there's always a way to not give homework. And if they're looking for a bell curve, I mean, there's no moral justification for bell curves. I mean, the bell curve, I mean, it's like, it's a racist, awful, terrible, terrible thing at its core. So find out who specifically wants to do that and find out how you can game it. Again, don't get fired, but whatever you can do to not do any of those things, that's my advice to you. But I'm done.
I want to add one really quick and more kind of building on what everyone mentioned. There will reach a certain point where if you're in that situation where you are stuck and that's something you have to do, you've gamed the scenarios. And ultimately, I think don't discount how important empathy is in that moment, for just as much for yourself, but for your students, maybe for their parents also. Recognizing and letting them know that this is a hard thing, and kind of giving them that reassurance on that this is something hard, it goes a really long way, because we're always going to be filled with, in our lives, with hard situations, and we may not be able to have control as much as we may try, and it's our job as teachers to let people know that we're struggling too with that, and that they're struggling, and it's okay that they're struggling. Radiate in all directions.
Thanks, you guys, all of you. I think we got everyone included on this. That's great. So, oh, Rachel, yeah, it's your turn. There we go. Okay, let's back up. It's you.
I think Jen's idea on the bell curve is probably the best one. I actually have like 50 as my low end. If they turn something in, they can't get below a 50. But just as a practice. But in terms of the homework, if you have to give homework and you can't get past it, you can't get around it, can't game it, grade it with them the next day. That way you get immediate result, like immediate feedback with them, and it's therefore it's useful, and it helps you with your grading. So you're not, because another thing that homework is a lot of grading.
Mhm.
So just as a suggestion, make it useful, but also make it something that you don't have pile up on you as well.
All really good points. Our next question switches over a little bit to ACTFL. So I'm really, really excited to hear your answers on this. So what advice do you have for creating tasks and rubrics for an integrated performance assessment? Who would like to start us off for that?
I'm super excited about this question. This is something I'm doing quite a bit of work on right now. I'm doing kind of like an action research project on how to update the IPA to include student choice, because I feel like students in the course of an IPA should be able to show what they're proud of, what they're confident in. And so I'm working on something for this, so feel free to reach out. But I think that when I've done IPAs in the past, trying to include student choice will have students more invested in that IPA. Of course, and I mean integrated performance assessment when I say IPA, just putting that out there. So when you're going over it with the students, giving them those options and really breaking it down into the different tasks, into interpersonal tasks, different choices for interpersonal tasks. Some students prefer low tech, some prefer high tech, just trying to think about how you can give students different options with that. So I'm excited about this question. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good one. Anyone else like to add on? If not, you guys, you just go over to the answer column. Everyone, this is for the audience as well. Answer column, type in your notes, and we can always expand on any of these from our panelists. Great. So this next question I have is actually for Benjamin. Benjamin, what famous Romans would be good topics, examples to use as a discussion prompt for talking about hard things in the Latin classroom?
Okay. I'm gonna give you 3 levels of answer, if that works.
Okay, bring it on. This is good. Let's do it.
And I will, and the reason I give 3, well, hopefully it'll be evident, I guess. The short answer, the first answer is really short. All of them. I think all of them are my suggestions. Of course, that's not enough. And then one of the things I learned over the years as a student is that when there are multiple answers given, it's because the first one it needs more. So the first answer needs more, but yes, all of them. The second one is my personal go-tos. I think when we're talking about Romans, the question sounds like it might be a bit maybe advanced Latin class. So I would say, to me, Catullus, Martial, and Ovid, I know they're all poets, what they provide are a few things that are valuable. Number one, I think Catullus, Ode ad Amo, I hate and I love. Nothing more resonant than that if you're a teenager studying anything, but Latin specifically, if it's in the class. And it gives you a range of things to think about. But what's so compelling about Catullus, there are moments you may be with him and feeling what he feels, and there are also moments when you're quite repelled by something he said. And I think what's also true, I had the good fortune of knowing Ronnie Ancona from my graduate school program, but also as someone who's used her text called Writing Passion. It's fantastic commentary. And she's talked about this, written about this. And one thing that she's done is prep teachers and prep students. There are some poems from Catullus that are depending on the school district you're in or the school community, may not be something you can teach. But it's also valuable to see that some of those are really tough, not just because of subject material content, but also because Catullus himself may end up saying some hateful things. God, how does someone even write that? I think Ovid is really fantastic just because he provides a full range. When you talk about Roman literature, you're also talking about Greek mythology, and any of us on this call will know how much Greek mythology provides hard things to talk about. In a way, I think when you think about Greek mythology and the whole idea of myth as something that really children gravitate towards, there's age appropriateness, and there's just Greek myths work for everybody of all ages. And I think ultimately it leads to the third answer I would give, because I think a second answer may give you a bit better than the first, but leave you a bit more that also needs to go into the response. And I think the full response is that I almost think that it's the approach to the Romans that you're going to look at or read or focus in any capacity. It's the approach as much as anything else. I think when we're talking about hard things, start light and easy in the same way that you would put up a picture for young students, older students. In fact, older students don't get enough pictures. Pictures are a great way to get things started because there's no right or wrong answers, just what we see. And I think ultimately, to really give you the answer that I want to give, I will say, is that it's more of a practice and a habit than a specific author. I loved what Rachel said earlier. If you're passionate about it, so will your students. Well, one of the best things about being a teacher, and I think being a teacher now may be different from when we were growing up and something before, is that instead of it being our job to say, this is what you will study and this is how we will do it, getting to be the person that puts an idea, a picture, a text in front of students and being better listeners than we were the day before is one of the most important parts of our job. So putting that hard text, that author, that picture, whatever it is, and be practicing that throughout the year, they gain a level of comfort. They gain a level of autonomy. They gain a level of trust that says we can share, because they're going to see you hear that and be okay with what they see. And then students will let you know what to talk about in a given text. So I hope those three make sense.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. That's great. I love that insight. Anyone else want to comment? Because if not, the next question is going to Jen. So she can come off mute. And the question, Jen, we have is, what were examples of ableism in the ancient world? For example, there is Sparta discarding babies. Which other examples from ancient literature or history or even civil policies can we allude to?
That's a really good question. And I'm by no means an expert in this, as coming to classics from more of a lit crit kind of artsy background than more of the history side. But they're written into the 12 tables is one thing. It's right there in law, the idea of who you exposing babies who with disabilities, frankly. There are some legal things in terms of a certain, we know that Athens had some sort of a stipend or a compensation to people with disabilities, like a one-time payment perhaps situation. We know that Roman law handles who gets an advocate in court. Like, for example, if you're blind, and by all means, someone type in, because I'm by no means, I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding is if you're blind, you could speak for yourself and represent yourself in court. But if you were deaf, you were allowed an advocate to speak for you. And the role in public life, the role of speaking, being a good speaker is such a valued trait to the Romans. The idea of not being what the Romans would perceive as a good speaker and how damaging that could be. So that's sort of the more legal side of it, the more quote unquote historical side. There's Claudius, there's Julius Caesar. Pliny mentions in his letters, he kind of will allude to different people having disabilities. There's a lot of inferring you have to do, because sometimes things are described in such a way that, the modern notions of what it is to have a disability are sometimes different from ancient understandings. And so there's a lot of really interesting scholarship. And I wanted to bring people's attention to this one article, because I think it's something you could absolutely use with high school students. It's written by an undergraduate. It was for an undergraduate, sort of a research symposium through the University of Missouri, St. Louis last year. And it's by Haley R. Graham. And it's called Disabled Gods, A Critical Disability Studies Analysis of Ancient Greek Myths. And this just ties in so great to what Ben was just saying, because so many Greco-Roman myths inform so much literature that these kids have come into contact with already, and that they're going to continue to continue reading, continue interacting with. A whole lot of kids are drawn to mythology, as we know, but we tend to reinforce a lot of ableism that's rooted in a lot of these myths. And this paper really tackles it in a way that young readers, high school kids could understand and digest. And it also will inform whenever you're going and reading sources about disabled people in antiquity. It can kind of help you in the back of your mind evaluate this source. Is this a good source to use or not? What lens are they looking at this situation through? And Haley talks about the idea that there are a lot of really harmful ideas that Greek myths can perpetuate about people with disabilities if you're not careful, right? The idea that a disability being inflicted with blindness or having your tongue removed, or these different, these very sort of gory things, as we know, Ovid loves to be gory sometimes. The idea that a disability is a punishment, or the idea that as a reward for being blinded, you then get, a second sight, or you can predict the future, or these different things. The idea of compensation for a disability, the idea that, and then the idea of having to overcome a disability, and that you should be praised when you work, harder than anyone else. And that's a really hurtful idea that's really damaging. And all of those ideas are perpetuated today. So just being aware of critical disability studies as a way to evaluate literature, and as a way to evaluate the content that you're going to see. And then finally, we know, and you see this in some textbooks, that Romans were very big on othering people for all number of reasons. But one of the big ones was physical disabilities. We know that Romans would enslave people with disabilities, and enjoyed really treating them in a way that had no dignity. And that it was considered a status symbol that you would enslave someone with a disability. And again, if you're going to be talking about slavery with students as an institution, don't shy away from necessarily bringing that in, but make sure you're talking about it in a way that affirms people with disabilities as having innate human dignity. And make sure you're not doing anything that in some way reinforces the idea that it's better not to have a disability, or things like that, because so much of that tends to get embedded in the literature. And if we're not careful, we've been exposed to it our whole lives, and we don't realize it. So I think this is a really great entry article. It's not really theory dense. It has some sources you can look at to help, but it provides a really nice framework for talking about these things.
Rachel.
I just wanted to say that I love the thought process of bringing in some of these things, like Aeneas's dad, who's like, just leave me here to die, things like that. And, you're making my mind just sort of start rotating around that and thinking about that in terms of some of our modern literature. I can't think of the name of the movie that came out recently, where it was about the girl and the guy that get together, and he commits suicide because he's just such a burden on her, so that she can live her life. And it was romanticizing the idea of a disabled person being a burden, right? Like literally romanticizing that idea. And I think what a great conversation those types of things could be together,
Yeah.
because we don't have a lot of like positive imagery within mythology and Roman society, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about it, because what we do is we talk about it and compare it to what's going on within our own societies.
Yeah, and there's even a reference in Pliny the Younger where he talks about this sort of wealthy elite Roman who, from my understanding, unfortunately, the sources that I found, I couldn't find a good citation to go look at the Pliny. So I'm going to keep doing some digging with this because it's interesting stuff. And Pliny talks about how it's unclear to me whether it's a disability or if it's just a matter of having grown older with age and an ailment you know, that I don't know that we would necessarily categorize that as being disabled today per se, but he's had to start to rely more and more on enslaved people for mobility help and for all these different things. And the way that it was translated, sort of indirectly in the article that I was reading, talked about that Pliny was basically like, oh, this poor guy doesn't realize he should be embarrassed that he can't move around on his own. And that's a really insidious idea. But that is a way that you could say, you point out the way that that Pliny's talking about it, but I would perhaps challenge that maybe this is a person who is living his best disabled life and is making, you know, is not coming from a place of, I need to feel ashamed of my body and what it can and can't do, because we don't want our students to feel ashamed of their bodies and what they can and can't do. And again, that's murky. You could perhaps argue that, oh, there's no way an ancient Roman would ever feel that way, but it is still a way that you can model a positive way to talk about disability with students and to give students a framework to avoid ableism in their speech as much as possible.
Jen, thanks so much. Rachel, thank you. Just to draw your attention to our Q&A, it looks like we have someone that has put a resource in there just for anyone else that's looking for more discussion on this topic. At this moment in time, believe it or not, we are actually at our end time mark to go into our final question. I feel like I could stay here for another 45 minutes with y'all because we just got started. I feel like we just got the warm-up round out of the way. But with that said, we'll go ahead and go into the final question. Anyone else that has anything, please feel free to reach out. We do have a feedback form to close with that you can also include that. And we'll make sure all of our teachers get specifics questions to them so they have an opportunity to answer those as needed and in their time. Okay, with that said, our final question that we'd like all of you to answer that a teacher proposed this week is, do you think that Latin should be changed in order to be sensitive to non-binary sensitivities? And then the next part is, if you had the opportunity, this is from another person, if you had the opportunity to keep exploring your area of topic, what would you envision to be the next steps? So that kind of gives you a little option to tackle one of the two of those questions. I'm happy to repeat whenever you like. But again, just, do you think Latin should be changed in order to be sensitive to non-binary sensitivities? And then if you were to continue to explore your topic, your area of expertise, what would you envision as next steps?
I would say look at the Q&A. I put in the Lupercal style guide. I think that could be extremely helpful when looking at non-binary, looking at traditionally underrepresented genders. I think that would be really helpful. And if I were to keep going on this, I would continue creating more resources and posting more things about underrepresented genders and women. And so more stories, and maybe creating some sort of collection that people could add to, and also sharing more templates for things for choice.
Thanks, Marie. Marie, do you want to tackle on the end of the next steps to your work?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, sorry. I was just going to ask Maureen if she wanted to expand quickly on her next steps for the work that she's been doing in her area.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I would love to continue creating resources and really centering people who weren't necessarily always centered in Roman stories, and really telling the stories of the everyday people, telling the stories of women in ancient Rome, telling the stories that are usually not told, people in the provinces who were Romans. I think trying to do more with that is something that I'm searching for in my own classroom, and that's something I'd want to keep going with.
Thank you.
What I wanted to add to that first question, and may I say also, I know a lot of us would be really appreciative if Maureen just kept sharing resources with us. So just want to put that out there. But when I think about that question, should classics be changed? It makes me think maybe I want to see the question differently. what does it mean? The ancient world. The ancient world was what it was. Does history change? The past is the past, but what changes, certainly our classrooms change, right? Did they have a seminar like this? Maybe it was in person instead of a video in the 19th century when they were teaching Latin? Probably not. But what really is so important, any of us who study anything, Latin, Greek, Romans, whatever, it's all really important to recognize that it's how we see what maybe didn't change back then will always change. That's just the constant and the real thing. And so when we look back, if we all as Latin teachers have access to things that were written 100 years ago, sometimes it's books and now they're all out of copyright, to see things like that, to look back at things like that and to see, ask the next question, what is it that was the cultural environment in which this text was written in 1927? Because it's not the same as 2020 or what will be in 2027 either. There's a change that's going to happen regardless of what we decide. Recognizing how our lens is different is the big piece. So sort of think about that.
And Ben, next steps for your work and the work that you do?
I will say I did feel, certainly with the intro piece, writing about or tackling hard things in the classroom, I felt like I hadn't even really started when I wrote it. It ended because I saw I was over whatever word requirement. I'm like, oh, how do I cut this down? I don't know. How do I stop now? I sort of feel like in some certain ways, I want to keep thinking about what it means. I always want to get definitional when I write and think, all right, if the question is, how do you tackle hard things? What are hard things? Hard things are different for different people. Is it hard for the teacher? Is it hard for the student? I want to think about the community setting. I would really love to write more about that because as we mentioned in the last 45 minutes, community settings, district, public schools, private schools, geography, there is so much that is different that goes into that. And thinking about a community is a huge piece of teaching hard things. And so I feel like I'm only just beginning it, and I would love to continue to look at that and so much more.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Jen, if you want to, you can go.
I just was going to pop in really quickly. My connection was unstable. So this may have been said. I apologize if I'm repeating anybody. I just wanted to say a quick note on the idea of being sensitive to non-binary, genderqueer folks. Yes, absolutely. Just unequivocally, misgendering people is an act of violence. And there's no faster way to tell someone they're not welcome in a space than not honoring who they are. It's one thing to try and make a mistake and correct yourself than to not try at all. So if you're coming from a place of like, well, I'm really worried I'm gonna make a mistake, like you will. Because especially if you've taught a student for a while with one set of pronouns but they've realized that a different set of pronouns fits them better, you're gonna make mistakes. But don't, I would say if you try to hide behind, well, the Romans wouldn't have acknowledged this. Well, we don't really fully know what everybody as a Roman, like what everyone's deal was. We don't know, but B, it might feel like a safety blanket to do that, but you're really sending a message to kids that you're not a safe person for them to be their authentic selves with. And that's just a program killer. Unless you're in a school where kids are required to take Latin, word's gonna get out real quick that your room is not a place for them. And so that's the only thing I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful point, and I appreciate you sharing that. On that note, why don't you tackle the last part of the question, the second, closing question, which is where are you looking to go? What are the next steps with your work that you're doing?
That's always such a big question because there are so many places that it all can go, right?
Yeah.
I have been interested in learning more on the ableism side of things, being more aware of of my own biases, the implicit bias that I have just as a person, but also growing up in the culture I've grown up in, and having a really keen eye towards my own resources, the things that I say, the way that I frame things, but also finding when a text does have this in it, a way that I can approach that with students that is uplifting for students and models an appropriate way to talk about these things. So really just continuing to read more from scholars who are doing work in this area. There was a comment in the question and answer. I just wanted to make sure that people listening make sure that they get this too. Michelle Martinez pointed out, I think that's who it was. I apologize if I have the wrong person. Dr. Debbie Sneed's work with disability in ancient Greece and Rome. And there's a place, a site called Crip Antiquity. And then Dr. Clara Bosick Schroeder has a lot of resources as well. So I want to continue looking there. I do follow Crip Antiquity on Twitter, and that's been really useful to kind of start to think about these things. But I really want to do more of a deep dive into the research side of that and really examine my practices more through that lens.
Oh, cool. Rachel, I think you were going to chime in a little bit with Jen.
I step in when nobody's stepping in. So, let's see. Of course, I think saying changing Latin is a strong word because Latin's grown whenever we felt the need to grow it, right? So, Latin hasn't just been the same since classical antiquity. It's morphed whenever people needed it to morph, and that's going to happen again because we need to update it to make it match what's needed. And my kids have all asked me, all is a strong word, but I've had kids asking me, what would be the word for gender neutral for a person? What's the right pronoun for this? Some because of siblings, some because of themselves. And this is something that's important to them. And I don't want to tell them that the language they're learning doesn't have a place for these people they love or for them. So obviously it needs to grow and be inclusive of all of our kids. This is more of creating something that reflects all students, but Latin never stayed one way. It always grew and it always morphed. So I think like all of us, I think at any point have, been like, it's never died and been that way. So I don't know. I wouldn't frame the question as we need to change Latin either.
Yeah.
So, and for the second question, I actually have a two-part direction for that because my year has been interesting. And none of your years have been interesting, I'm sure, just mine. But I've been pushing against my system a lot and fighting for a lot of changes. And I really feel like it's been a good thing. I am part of an equity group within my my district. My district's really big. We have 23 high schools. And each of those, of course, have feeder middle schools and elementary schools. So we have 180,000 students in my district. So we are a group that works towards equity and equity practices within our district. And I have been part of this group that's fighting for equity within the district. And on that scale, I've found it really fulfilling to be working with this group and working towards these equity practices outside of my own classroom. And I'm wanting to continue doing that. And then, so that's the one part of where I'm going next, I think. And then within my own classroom, I'm continuing. One of the things that I've had a lot of thoughts about over the last few years is this idea of, well, I'll just do this unit on, well, there's Black History Month in February, so I'll do Black History in February. Black History Month should be all year round. I mean, why do we just decide that there's a period of time in which we will focus on this thing? So my goal has been to incorporate multicultural and multi-ability and multi gender type of interaction interaction curriculum in my stuff all year round. And of course, that's not always like an immediate type of change, but it's a change I've been working on. So, like this semester, we've been studying Andromeda. She's an Ethiopian princess. We've been making sure to I've been making sure to incorporate that. We just finished reading Pliny the Elder's stuff on how races are tied to their habitats, and we talked about what that meant in terms of possible racism, xenophobia, and bigotry within Rome. You know, I'm trying to make it something that we sort of look at year round, and we're going to do Alexander the Great next semester. And we'll talk a little bit about, I think, ability and disability with him because he had some interesting issues. So,
if I can piggyback real quick, I think that's awesome. One thing that I've found really helpful for anyone else who's interested in this idea of sort of incorporating more multicultural things throughout, one of the warm-ups that my kids love is something I got from Justin Slocum Bailey, the In Hoc Die, like on this day in history. And you give kids 4 events and they have to choose how you want to do it, either which one did happen on that day or which one did not. Like 3 of them did happen on this day in history, 1 didn't. And it's a good way just to kind of have kids just love it. In general, it's sort of interesting. So you can kind of, they're going to all pay attention. So I try to sneak in like words I want to make sure they hear and that kind of thing. But that's a really good place. I try to always uplift something historical related to and like a person of color, like, like Jay-Z released his first album, or these different, different sort of touchstones like that, or Emily Dickinson published her first set of poems, or this is what happened to this indigenous group of people on this day, or these different, I try to find ones that are sort of positive and uplifting, because I teach younger kids, and so I'm not going to be like, this is a trail of tears, 5th graders, like that's just not appropriate necessarily for what I'm doing. But that's a really good way to sort of infuse a lot of different types of things into it, where you don't have to prep a lot. You don't have to make an entire lesson. And it's okay if it's not necessarily something that's in your comfort zone. It's just a chance to kind of see something kind of that the kids wouldn't necessarily see in their day otherwise. That's I can share the ones I have with you. Please correct the Latin if it's bad and let me know.
That's great. Thanks, Jen. And to close, John, do you need me to repeat the question or?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, okay, great. So the last 2 closing questions that were asked this past week were, 1, do you think Latin should be changed in order to be sensitive to non-binary sensitivities? And the other question is, if you had the opportunity to keep exploring your topic, what do you envision as some of the next steps? What's your direction?
All right, the answer to number 1, yes.
Perfect.
And the answer to number 2, how to go further? I would continue to focus on structure in terms of how we teach our classes and what we do. Because I mean, again, we can talk all up and down about every kind of everything. And to our class of all white rich kids, like we can do that up and down. But I think none of this stuff has the impact that we want it to have if it's just, again, the same group of rich white kids. Like, to me, the thing that I want to focus very much on is on the structure. Because I mean, it wasn't like I didn't sign up for Latin in high school because like the topics weren't on there. It's like, every class is like that. Like every class is like, vaguely like, I mean, growing up, like, black guy, every class was vaguely racist or kind of like not, there's all this stuff there. So it wasn't like, well, how deep do we get into the issue of slavery? And like, no, I didn't care. It was like, is this a place where I get treated like a human being? Is this a place where I'm welcome? Is this a place where I'm going to flunk out in a week? Does someone else from my community like me say, hey, I took Latin, it was good? Or like, oh, don't take Latin. The teacher's like kind of a, and like they just like to flunk out the black kids day one, and so they can have like their little white whatever have you. So if I'm going forward, what I'm focusing on are the structural issues that are keeping our field 100% white, basically. I mean, other than me and like a couple of other people, like that's what I think is what's keeping our field white. And until I get to the other end of that one, I think we're going to be here for a while. But that's where I'm focusing on.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we have gone over time, but I think it was well worth it. Thank you all for sticking with us. We appreciate you giving up your evening, sharing it with us. I'm so appreciative to have this opportunity to learn from these amazing teachers. I really want to be in all of your classrooms. That would be super amazing for a week to just experience each of your teaching styles and the classroom. So thank you so much. And on behalf of everyone at Cambridge University Press, the Latin department, we thank you for sharing this journey with us and being part of our journey with this as well.